Marcelo H. del Pilar historically was a journalist, lawyer, a crucial figure during the reform movement where he kindled every national sentiment of the Filipinos to fight against the treatment of the Spanish to the Filipinos. Also an anti-friar, seeing how as this position is dominated by Spanish ones. And he, being an ilustrado, hated the system. He said, and I quote, "The friars control all of the fundamental forces of the society in the Philippines. They control the educational system. They control the minds of the people, because in a dominantly Catholic country, the parish rectors can utilize the pulpit, confessionals to publicly or secretly influence the people." He historically frequently fought against the abuses the friars did, vocally even, and became an editor for the La Solidaridad, and even had his own newspaper, where he translated it into Tagalog, the Diarong Tagalog, where it publishes the horrid treatment of the Filipinos under the friars, including the Spanish officials, and vied for reform and, better yet, an independence. It is safe to say, with him being the katastasang ilustrado in this timeline, having the power of the government, he could most definitely influence the cabinet members to limit the power of the Catholic Church, perhaps a separation of power, but this time run by the people, and the rules of the state are above all else. Also historically, a member of the Freemasonry in the Spanish, Freemasonry in the Philippines. I quote, "Masonry is not a way of life for pleasure. It is a way of sacrifice. Masonry is not a society of mutual aid. Mutual protection is a part of its rule, and every Mason has a duty of assisting his brethren. But this is not the sole and final objective. It is to uphold the principle of universal brotherhood, and consequently, to uphold the principle of democracy, the real and effective autonomy of human individuality, opposed to the enslaving ambition of those peasants who nurture their greed by trampling upon the rights of others, and who build their happiness at the expense of the tears of the needy." His ideology of a strong commitment to the progress of the people and nation would be agreed upon by majority of those who are in favor of a strong centralized nation. And if even, I could see him vastly militarizing the nation and further vast industrialization, ports, infrastructure, governmental buildings, dockyards, and educational institutions. Historically, he along with others were forced to leave for Spain to avoid arrests, and that's where they bolstered the propaganda movement to reform the colonial government. And to note that at this time, 55 years have passed, and the cycle of people being sent abroad to study and then return to serve the young nation could be seen by some as a great opportunity. But some who chose to stay abroad, which Marcelo H. del Pilar do not like. So he could vow to change that by enlisting the help of fellow ilustrados who stayed to build what the nation lacked. Schools, education, the massive brain drain from early on is still a huge problem. With a strong will and persistent mindset, this era under Marcelo would have been the most prosperous, ambitious, and possibly even expansionist. But before he could expand, he'd be forced to be the de facto emperor by holding the position of prime minister, which is legal if the emperor did not choose a successor. But let's say he didn't, and now the power is in Marcelo's hands. The following historical records are as follows. 1883, Krakatoa volcano explosion. Various settlements in Mindanao are damaged. Marcelo Pilar addresses a horrified people in the south that they will rebuild a new and better city. 1884, the Sino-French War. Marcelo sent an ambassador to the French, warning them of their expansionist presence and telling them to not violate the integral maritime territory. The French ignored this request, and so Marcelo calls for mobilization. But a year later, the French responded to not explicitly saying that they will not attack, but assures that no war will take place. This prompted Marcelo to momentarily purchase cannons and build defenses, especially in the port of Mindanao and Manila. 1887, the Manila School of Agriculture is established and Noli Me Tangere published. Jose Rizal is growing in popularity. 1889, the newspaper El Ilocano is established and nationalized form of media. 1892, the newspaper Diarong Tagalog is established, a media written in Tagalog. Unionist, a strict police state is now the order. The motto of the day is progress, technological advancement, and the law is the state. The people serve the state and the state serves the people. Since historically, Marcelo's drive came from the harshness of the Spanish friars, in this timeline, he could have been paranoid by what could happen if religion could influence his government. Perhaps an assassination attempt by Spanish loyalists who stayed after a revolution, so anyone who steers away from his direction would be a target target for suspicion. Those who wanted to relax the policies on religion in the state would probably be targeted, especially those in the south again, who are predominantly Muslim, would be suppressed, and I could see Marcelo's disdain for religion would increase as he gets older. As an ambitious man in office, he would have taken the nation into the direction of true progress, which the people agree with. But 1888 onwards, I could see his rule going from steady progress to a capitalist utopia, especially with opening the trade with America. So perhaps, instead of America forcing Japan to abandon isolationism, they'd be dealing with Marcelo's state, moving away from social reforms to capitalist democracy, where I could see his neglect of the lower and middle classes in favor of monetary gain, which would upset the people. And the fact that he essentially runs a police state, no one could challenge him. This would definitely anger fellow Ilustrados. And on the 5th of July, 1892, Marcelo H. del Pilar passes away from tuberculosis early on. Opposition to his administration could have gotten a huge following. Historically, on the 4th of July, 1892 is when the Katipunan would have been established by Andres Bonifacio against the Spanish. But in this timeline, he could have led an opposing party against Marcelo H. del Pilar's capitalist endeavors concerning the neglect of the lower and lower middle class. I could see an instance where demonstrations on multiple occasions against Marcelo's policies could be met with massive arrests and possibly numerous deaths. In 1896, Marcelo historically dies of tuberculosis, so I will put that as his cause of death. But let's say it happened early on. And so with the announcement of Marcelo H. del Pilar's death, since Andres Bonifacio is under no pressure, I could see him not escalating the situation and call for a ceasefire between the supporters and the central government. After a 4-day funeral on the 9th of July 1892, Andres Bonifacio held a speech before millions of people and numerous members of the Katipunan ng mga Ilustrado to elect him as the new prime minister, to go back to the golden days where the state served the people just as the people served the state. 1892, the Katipunan ng mga Ilustrado voted majority to elect Andres Bonifacio, but many of Marcelo's children claimed the imperial throne for themselves, as this is how emperor should rule. So a meeting of the Katipunan ng mga Ilustrados was held in Intramuros City Hall to discuss that this is the second time an emperor of this nation died without a clear successor, and Andres Novales failed to specify if the successor has to be inherited. So a 3-day-long debate occurred, and it is concluded that the position of prime minister and emperor could be henceforth be used interchangeably and will be voted on if the seated emperor did not pass on the title before they die. 20th of August 1892, they elected Andres Bonifacio again as prime minister while holding the title of Kataas-Taasang Supremo, or emperor of the nation. His first years in office could see a conflict of those who supported him and those wealthy who supported Del Pilar's family's claim to the throne, as historically this decade onwards is essentially the revolution towards Philippine independence. Being a patriot at heart, he continues the legacy of progressivism, perhaps the redistribution of wealth, patriotism. He is the man of the people, and the wealthy probably hated him. Under Marcelo's reign, he is the leading figure in the growth of businesses. Dealing with America and Great Britain, or even the French Empire and the German Empire, he successfully raised the economy further. As a historical businessman, he'd be reforming some policies of Marcelo, continuing the self-sustainability idea, where people do not have to be mandated to study abroad, because some are staying in Europe and few chose to come back. And those people who live are what the state currently needs. And perhaps at this time, the condition of the state would have awful healthcare system, awful financial system as well. Under Bonifacio, there'd be a lot of domestic projects concerning technology, manufacturing, industry, agrarian, production, and processing of products, if possible. It could probably be this era where we could see him removing the people who refused to give up their wealth. And with Bonifacio being the commander of the army, he could easily subjugate the wealthy, which some chose to leave, which would hurt the nation greatly. So he has to convince the entire population of his ideas. In this timeline, I could see him using his power to support national sentiments in foreign nations, perhaps supplying weapons, money, aid to topple foreign occupiers, just like in Dutch East Indies. But for now, he would be merging his personal-led faction and the Katipunan ng mga Ilustrados to have a unified central authority. He would be working closely with Emilio Jacinto and Teodoro Plata, who both historically worked with him in Andres Katipunan and see a favorable position within the cabinet. Historical accounts follows. 1893, Hawaiian Kingdom is overthrown. Bonifacio sees this as a threat and warns the cabinet to be wary of American influences in the government and business. 1894, outbreak of the First Sino-Japanese War. Bonifacio now has to look at all points of the compass for expansionist tendencies and reaffirms the position of the new nation being neutral, having no interest in expanding, to Emperor Meiji to have their word of not being a future target of their empire. 1895, Taiwan is ceded to the Empire of Japan. Perhaps some Chinese escaped the occupation into the nation, in which Bonifacio allowed and kept them protected until they decide to migrate to America or to the mainland of China. 1897, Emperor Gwangmu proclaimed independence of the Korean Empire, and so Bonifacio sent a group of representatives to congratulate and hopes for positive relations between the two nations. 1899, Bonifacio personally attends the Hague Convention of 1899. 1900s, Manila Bulletin is established, written in both English and Tagalog. 1903, Union Obrera Democrática Filipina, led by Dominador Gomez, aiming for workers' rights, as well as a public holiday for May 1st. As a response, Bonifacio passes the first Agrarian Reform Act that included attempts at revitalizing worker conditions. 1905, the end of the Russo-Japanese War. Bonifacio sends representatives to congratulate them and formalizes a defensive military alliance. With a statesman and business-minded personality, a new national revival would probably be embedded in the new generations. Not radical yet, but strong enough that Andres Bonifacio appointed Jose Rizal as the 4th Prime Minister, and then Mariano Ponce as the 5th Prime Minister. Finally, the hierarchy is complete, with both an emperor and a clear successor in the government. But on the 30th of November, 1910, Andres Bonifacio dies at the age of 47, possibly of an ailment, giving the title of Emperor to Emilio Jacinto. But as a surprise to everyone, a month later, an emergency meeting was held where Emilio Jacinto decided to step down and instead gave the position to a certain Captain General Luna, who in this timeline is a close friend with Jacinto and approves of Luna's military reforms.